Hello, everyone. Welcome to IERLab Podcast. Now, who is IERLab? IERLab is the Influencer Ethnography Research Lab located at Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia. We specialize in the methodologies and the pedagogies of influencer research. I'm your host, Walter Lee, so let's get started with today's episode. Today, we will be focusing on a successful article written by today's guest, along with a previous guest, Professor Crystal, from our first episode. The title is called When Brands Become Stans, Netflix Originals, and Enacting a Fanish Persona on Instagram. Today's guest has a Bachelor of Arts majoring in Digital and Social Media at Curtin University, where she finished with first-class honours for her original research on Netflix's use of Instagram, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. She works as a digital marketing and content specialist in the arts industry in Australia and has since then graduated in 2021. Welcome to the show, Casta Sligh.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you for joining us today. So it's a recurring thing on the show that I usually ask what started it all off. So my first question for you is, where did the interest of your paper stem from?
Yeah, so I am like a fan of fandoms. I'm a weird person where I don't actively participate in any fandoms, but I must know what everyone is up to at all times. Maybe I'm just very nosy, I'm not sure. So I have an interest in what people are interested in. I work now, as you said, in social media. I'm a content specialist, so that interest has served me quite well. And the other part of it is I was also on Tumblr recreationally from about like 2012, 2014 time, and fandom was very big on Tumblr at that time. And what I found so interesting about it when I was first coming across like online fan communities was really seeing the fan works that got created and the communities that would form. Because I was seeing some people create like artworks that are amazing or create like novel length fan fiction. And that was really interesting to me, a person who would not get out of bed for no money. I was like, wow, look at these people really doing creative work for their community for free. That is so cool. Could never be me, but I love to see it. And
Well,
so when I was thinking about research topics years later, I had run across a Netflix run Instagram account. I believe the first one I noticed was for a Netflix original series that's called Umbrella Academy.
Mhm.
And I noticed it because I'd look at the post and the captions on the post were what I immediately recognized as like Tumblr language. It was like Tumblr fandom language. You would have a still from the program, and then you have a caption like, this is literally me, or like, this is how my mum talks to me when I don't do la la la. Like, very odd for a brand run account. I was like, this is uncanny. It's totally, they're just copying that sort of fandom language from Tumblr.
Hmm.
So I thought that was very interesting, and that kind of set me down the path. Obviously, 10 years later, Tumblr is not really as popping as it once was, but Instagram is.
Hmm.
And through my research, I found that pretty much every Netflix original series had its own Instagram account, an official Netflix run Instagram account. And several of them had these very interesting sort of voices to them. And I guess the other thing that sort of caught my attention is I'm a millennial, but I'm noticing like now for Gen Z, the younger generation, those who really grew up like as digital natives, online fan communities are not so much weird and niche as they used to. I would say like it seems that these online fandoms and the cultures and the specific slang and the language that they use, it's sort of folded in a bit more just to like online culture generally.
Hmm.
I've sometimes found myself looking at these fun, like little YouTube videos or quizzes that's like, how much Gen Z slang do you know? And some of the slang that comes up as Gen Z slang is always Y/N, which is your name, which is a fandom thing. It's used in self insert fan fiction. Time was when I was young, that would have been really niche. And you'd have to be like a bit of an internet freak or like a fandom person to really know that stuff. But it's common knowledge now, which I love to see. I love to see people like unabashedly just really loving what they love. I haven't fully overcome my cringe yet, my instinct to cringe, but I feel like the kids have. God bless them. I'm
Well,
jealous.
that's quite
They're into fandom. They're
interesting.
having a great time.
Like you said that you are not part of a fandom. Is there any reason why is there anything that you're close to that you would consider yourself a fan, or why are you not a fan of anything?
I don't commit to any one thing, I suppose. I don't get into the participation. I guess I follow some fandoms the way that some people follow like sports if you're a casual sports fan.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't participate. I mean, I can't draw, so there's certain barriers like that. I can't draw, I'm not a good creative writer, so I'm probably not gonna be doing any of that stuff, and I'm a person who loves to work, so maybe the idea of the unpaid labor that fans do is not particularly appealing to me. I'm so, like, hustle culture pilled that I'm like, "But what? For no money? All this time and effort? No, unfeasible, we can't do that."
Yeah, I know that
Um
Harry Potter, like I've got a friend who's very into Harry Potter and they have deep fan fiction written on like that are books basically in themselves and
mm,
they don't get paid for it at all. And I'm a bit like you where I'm like, you're spending a lot of time making this huge fan fiction and you're not going to get paid for it. I mean, how much time do you have on your hands and do you actually work is sort of my questions to them.
yeah.
But, I
Yeah,
completely
but
agree
it's a
with you.
hobby though.
Yeah, yeah, doing
Yeah,
it for
I'm not
free
trying
is
to
not
knock
something
it.
I would want to do. So, can you actually, sorry, elaborate more on the statement? Because you did say this, when brands become stands. Now, can you just tell us a little bit more
Mm,
about when brands become stands and why you wrote it this way?
yes, because it rhymes and it's a catchy title. No, because okay, so if you don't know what a stan is, that's sort of a fandom slang word as well. Stan is a reference to a song by Eminem from several years ago, which is from the point of view of an obsessive fan. So at some point on Stan Twitter, as it used to be called back when Twitter was Twitter and not a dumpster fire, we used to say Stan as like a super fan, but these words sort of lose their potency over time. So Stan can just mean you're a fan of something.
Sorry,
Sorry, one moment.
I'd never made the connection between the Eminem song and also Stan. Like, I mean, I'm also a
It's an
millennial, grew
awful
up,
song.
yeah, with that
I
song.
hate that song.
It is quite a violent
It's
song. It's not the
yeah,
most,
it's so disturbing. I was
it's
like,
not the
"Kids, really?
nicest
This
song, no.
one? That's the slang we're using?" But yeah, it's too late now. It's in the
But I didn't
zeitgeist.
realize that it was somewhat connected. But yes, continue.
So what I'm trying to say with the title, I guess, is that I saw these Netflix run accounts behaving like fans. I go into what that exactly means in the paper that I wrote. But basically they're posting memes, they're posting fan art, they're doing captions using like fan slang and basically talking from the point of view of a fan on Instagram. And I thought that's interesting because historically, when we look at Instagram and we study Instagram, a lot of what we're studying is influencers. And a lot of that discussion revolves around how Instagram is a platform that was created for, an everyday person, if you like. And
Hmm.
then we sort of saw it become professionalized over the years when people figured out they could make a dollar on Instagram.
Hmm.
And, brands and platforms started to come onto, sorry, different brands started to come onto the platform normatively. Every brand seems to have an Instagram account these days.
That's right.
And so what we've seen is, if you're an influencer, your full-time job is sort of your personal brand, the personal brand that you've built up and sharing your life online. That's your work, that's your income, that's the profession that you're in. And so we can say that that's you, a person, a human being, becoming a brand or becoming like a brand. Your life sort of becomes your work, if you like. And so what I posit in the paper is now we're sort of starting to see the opposite. We're seeing brands trying to turn themselves into humans on Instagram. So that's the title where it comes from, when brands become stands.
I do have a question about that later, where you think that like brands do become humans, which is quite an interesting thing. But my first question before that would be, why is Instagram the choice of platform for Netflix when I feel like TikTok is the fastest growing social media platform, I think, these days? Why is it still Instagram that is the choice platform?
Mm. And TikTok is very important as well. TikTok and Instagram are both very visually driven platforms. They have that in common. At the time of the study, what it was that I looked at every Netflix original series that had put out a season in the last year. And whilst some of them did have like Facebooks and some of them did have Twitters, pretty much all of them had Instagrams. So I focused on that because it was a platform that Netflix was obviously investing a lot in at that point in time. And they still are. They do have a presence on TikTok as well, but they're not at the point of making a TikTok for each individual Netflix original series, which
Hmm.
they were doing for Instagram. So I think if I would sort of posit a theory on it. They may be focusing on Instagram a lot because of demographics. They may also be focusing on it because of it's a visual platform.
Hmm.
And also it has this sort of interesting murky waters when it comes to promotion. If you look at Instagram historically, we have had business tools on Instagram, so tools for brands to use since about 2014. But obviously promotion was happening on Instagram before that. And that would be in the form of Instagrams perhaps promoting a product. They may have been paid to promote that product, but they may not have disclosed that they were being paid or they had some sort of vested financial interest. We do have laws against this now in several countries. Australia is one country where you do have to disclose if you are advertising something for money. That's where we see these sort of hashtag spawn, hashtag ad, disclosures on posts from, say, influencers. We know that it still doesn't always happen despite the legislation. But what is interesting, if you take a moment to think about it, is that so we expect, definitely in Australia, because there are laws, to see disclosure on the post from an Instagram influencer when that person is promoting something for money. But we don't expect to see such a disclosure on, say, Netflix's account, because obviously it's a brand account. If you would look at the account, you would see it's verified, it has a blue tick, that's the official account. Okay, Netflix is probably running it. So the account must exist for the purpose of promotion, but it doesn't behave like we would expect a brand to behave. It's not very salesy. I coded all of the messages for whether they had an orientation that was task orientated. So that is, hey, stream this, go stream it now. Or whether it's socio-emotional orientated, which is pretty much everything else. It's the, hi, good morning, look at these characters, they're so cute. And the vast majority was socio-emotional. And so that combined with the type of content they were sharing, which is, like I said, a lot of memes, a lot of jokes, a lot of fan art. If you were scrolling through your feed, it would have no difference at all to a post made by a fan a lot of the time. So you can't really tell it apart. But, we would think it would be silly to ask Netflix to do hashtag ad or hashtag spawn. We don't expect that from brands at this point. And so that line is very blurry on Instagram. And I think that can only be helpful to Netflix.
So it's almost like they found a loophole.
Yeah, basically. It's like how if you have a brand account on TikTok, you're not supposed to use copyrighted music, but there's nothing to stop you uploading a TikTok with copyrighted music in it. There's always a loophole.
Yeah. Well, can you actually tell us how fans relate to these sorts of accounts? Like, for instance, for yourself, do you also follow these sort of accounts, or do you watch other people following those sort of accounts?
Yeah, I stubbornly refuse to follow them myself. I don't really follow any brand accounts, but I do check up on them from time to time. I like to see what they're up to. I wish I could comment on this more. I wish I'd been able to really study the comments because that is very juicy to me and very interesting. But I didn't do any data collection of the comment sections because you need a whole ethics approval. It's a whole thing, and I'm too lazy, so I didn't do that. But I did look over them. Some of the accounts I studied also would normatively respond to 3 comments on every post. Don't know why, but it was always 3. So they would interact with the people a little bit. And I observed a pretty positive response. I went to the comment section as soon as I recognized that they were doing Tumblr speak or fandom speak, because I wanted to know, are the people clocking them on this? Are the people going, hey, this is weird, like this brand account trying to talk like a cool young person? Because we can compare this to the first sort of great brand migration onto social media, which was on Twitter several years ago. And we have records of pushback from the people of Twitter against the brands on Twitter from as early as about 2014. And I do mention this in my paper. There's one, funny meme that's called Silence Brand, which is image macro of a spider crab with laser eyes. And when people thought that a brand was being cringy and trying too hard and trying to be one of the cool kids, they would just spam, the Twitter replies with this spider crab with laser eyes saying Silence Brand. And there's a how do you do, fellow kids? And there's memes like that we use to push back when the people wanted to say, yeah, we're not buying it. We're not buying at Pizza Hut. We're not buying at McDonald's. Stop. You're not cool and you'll never be cool. But I wasn't observing that actually on Instagram. Part of that might be at that time, this is different on Instagram now, but at that time you couldn't respond with a GIF or any sort of image. You had to respond with text. And it has to be quite short as well. But the people who are following those accounts also are fans. So any, content that they post, they're probably going to be quite happy to see it most of the time. And yeah, people seem to get a kick out of it, really, particularly when the the brand would respond to them, like when they got a reply from the Instagram account on their comments. People seem to think that was quite fun.
Yeah, we'll go straight into the next question. Like, what kind of fandom has spawned from these accounts? Like, we've talked a little bit about fan fiction as well as, art as well. Is there anything else that, has spawned from these accounts?
I don't think we can credit the accounts themselves for actually spawning the fandom. I think the accounts are there to either encourage fandom, or you could argue that they're there to centralize the fandom in a way that Netflix has control over. I would say they act sort of more like a fertilizer to fandom than actually like a seed.
Hmm.
But the Instagram accounts are there to do community building. They're there to say good morning. They're there to say, oh, don't you love this scene? Don't you love this character? I think that might be particularly important for Netflix because they do tend to have such a long break between seasons coming out. It's usually between 1 and 2 years between seasons.
Hmm.
The accounts aren't really active the whole time. I was just looking at the most active time, which is after a new season has dropped.
Hmm.
But they do things like sharing fan art. I would say it's to encourage and to foster positive feelings around that particular cultural product, and in some ways to guide how you interact with it. So talking about fan art, all of the accounts that I looked at did share fan art from fans. They shared it with attribution, so we know it's real, it comes from real people. But there was a difference in how they did it. So one of the interesting things about the sex education Instagram account, if you're familiar with the British teen drama Sex Education, that was one of the ones that I looked at. When they shared fan art from people, they edited it into frames. So it would be a carousel of like 9 posts, and all of the fan art would be photoshopped into a little frame. So it looked like it was in a museum or like an art gallery. And so it's this way of sort of like elevating the work to say it was like so good. It was such a work of art. And there were other things on that Instagram account where they shared poetry and they shared, bits of the writing from the show in a kind of artistic way in the style of Insta poetry. So it was like a theme on that account that they were elevating elements of the show, like, the writing and the fan art. And it was sort of positioned the fans as almost like connoisseurs, more sort of like informed, consumers of high art rather than like TV fans, which holds less cultural value.
Hmm.
I don't think it should or that it has to, but I think in our culture, it's fair to say if you're like a fan of opera, you might be a connoisseur, an aficionado, but if you're a fan of sports, you're just a fan. And we think of these things a little bit differently. But yeah, on that account, it was, positioning the fans to, I think, validate them spending time to make fan art and also money to have a Netflix subscription. There were other ways they did that as well. Like they really highlighted, this is back when they had a storyline in the show about like a sexual assault that happened. And it was sort of like a women's rights type storyline. And they featured that a lot in their Instagram. And it was almost like it was saying, like, look at this good work we're doing. We're so topical. We're spreading this sort of Me Too story. So like elevating the act of what is in its most basic form. We're watching a show, a series, but it's like, no, we're being socially conscious. We're consuming art, and it's sort of like changes the positioning of that way. I think the thing that does potentially like spawn fandom the way that we're seeing it for Netflix original series, it might have more to do with the actual content and the distribution model. This was something very interesting that I found through my process of research, but we've found all these interesting things about binge watching. And so Netflix originals, they are normatively released the whole season at one time. So you can watch all the episodes in a day or two if you really wanted to. And we've found like that has several interesting impacts. Like it increases viewer empathy, it increases your investment in the show. It increases your likelihood of posting about the show if you feel very involved with it. You're more likely to post on social media, which perhaps is obvious. But Netflix sort of encourages binging with the model. Also, they only ask you, are you still watching after about 90 minutes, I believe it is. And they were trialing at the time I was writing, just removing that altogether if you wanted to. And we've also found that binging increases the likelihood that a viewer would develop a parasocial relationship with the characters of the show. Now, I know me and you and everyone who does internet studies is probably sick to death of the term parasocial relationships ever since the YouTube commenters got onto it like 2 years ago. But let the record show, I was researching this before it was cool. And it is an interesting thing that I think explains a lot of the fan behavior that we can see. Of course, if you're spending a lot of time with these characters and if you are binging, and we know research shows that is going to increase your emotional investment. And you can go to Instagram as well to sort of get more content and feel more engaged. Are you really likely to want to cancel your Netflix subscription if it feels like that's canceling your access towards your quote unquote friends who are like
Mm.
the characters in the show? Um, it's very smart. Obviously, we can't know, and we probably never will know exactly what Netflix is thinking when they are approaching this. We don't even know who runs the accounts. It's probably a team of people. But yeah, they hold all the cards in this regard. But yeah, it
I'm
seems
not.
to me I'd be very surprised if they didn't know that the binge model increases viewer attachment and the likelihood that they'll develop a parasocial relationship with characters.
I'm not sure if you could answer this question, but like maybe you could give your take on it. In a society that is basically now addicted to short form media, why are we still sort of addicted to binge watching when it still takes a lot of our time?
That's a good question. We know a lot of why people get into binge watching can be the fear of missing out and the fear of being spoiled. So if it feels like a big event and everyone's going to watch it really quickly and you won't be able to open your TikTok or your Instagram until you've finished it because you'll probably see something that's a spoiler from that.
Mm.
I think that's part of it. And I think what we've seen, particularly like during the pandemic and the post-pandemic years, is like a real need for belonging. People want to belong to something and have community, and fandom provides that for a lot of people. So, and that like binging is also a fan behavior as well
Mm.
that is tacitly encouraged by Netflix. So yeah, I think yeah, it's true that there is like a very short attention span that's observable, particularly in young people today. I
Mm.
think there will always be a place for these longer form dramas,
Hmm.
if only as sort of a jumping off point for community, for reimagining, for remixing, yeah, for lip syncing scenes from it on TikTok. You need a text to begin with, generally speaking, and then everything else follows on from that. Yeah. That's what I
Yeah.
think. Not that we are not having TikTok dramas play out in real time. We are. We absolutely are. And that's the way of the future as well.
I do see it a lot on TikTok, and I would say also, I guess, one thing that sticks in my mind as part of this fandom was the Wednesday Addams dance that was sort of very popular for quite a long time. It showed that
Mm.
like everyone was putting it on their Instagram, everyone was putting it on their TikTok. I mean, it's the same for me. I was a little bit sick of it because it's the same thing over and over again. I get it, it's a unique dance, but yes, for me, it was a bit too much.
Yeah.
But anyway,
No,
I'd
it's
like
it's
to end.
absolutely in there for a reason.
Hmm.
I Can I say one more thing
Yeah,
on
sure.
this? Originally, one of my ideas was like, can I prove that Netflix original series are being created with social media in mind? Like, are there things in the series that are only in there so that they'll go viral on social media? But then I found out I could not really prove it in any way, shape, or form. So I didn't do that in the end as my research question.
So it's more like a
But on the
conspiracy
topic of
theory.
the dance, yeah, a little bit. But if we're talking about dancing, right? One of the series I looked at was Umbrella Academy. There's a random dance sequence in every season of Umbrella Academy. It has nothing to do with anything, but it's always in there because it goes viral on TikTok. I think it's the only reason they do it. There'll be a completely like out of place dance sequence once a season, every season. For what reason? What else could that possibly be? And the other thing I did notice on all of the accounts is that all of them had what I called extra content, which
Hmm.
was content that at first glance seemed like it was from the show, but if you went back and checked, it wasn't actually in there. So I was looking very closely. One of the examples I have in the paper is there's a sort of comical image. This is from Umbrella Academy again, where two characters are in the foreground having a very tense standoff. And then there's one character you can see in the background who's making a sort of melodramatic pose. And so with the caption going, oh, the person in the background is called Klaus. Klaus is literally me anytime there's drama. So it's funny, the caption and the image together. But that image is not in the show. If you go back and watch that scene, the two people in the foreground having the tense standoff are there, but the person in the background is not visible. So it's an image that only Netflix has. Like, I don't know if they took it on set, if they constructed it afterwards. Do they have a social media person like on the set at the time capturing this sort of thing? Unfortunately, there's no way for me to know. But it does sort of reiterate that like Netflix, they can sort of be their own best fan account. Like in the past, we would have had fan run fan accounts, and now we have Netflix run fan accounts, and they have all the data and all the media and all the first-hand access to everything. So it's no wonder they're going to be the biggest account like in the fandom space. No one else can compete with them for that access to content.
Actually, I think you're onto something there. I do really think that there might be purposely inputting things into shows for it to go viral on TikTok. I mean, at the moment, it's a conspiracy theory, but I really actually believe now that you've said it, it kind of makes a lot of sense. I mean, there are a
You'll
lot of
start to
things
notice
that
it all the
go,
time.
yeah,
Oh,
there's a lot
girl,
of
have
things
you
that go
seen Poor
viral.
Things?
Hmm.
Poor Things. I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you, Emma Stone.
Okay, so we're just going to end up with our last question today. And you did use this quote in your paper, but why is the human voice necessary for these accounts?
Mm. I don't know if it's necessary, but it certainly helps. Like, I don't
Hmm.
know if I mentioned this before, but I looked at other accounts, a handful of other accounts. Like, for instance, at the time I was studying, there's a Netflix series called Ozark, which was very popular. Their
Hmm.
account doesn't talk like this. They're not doing fan voice. They're talking more or less in a sensible corporate sort of way.
Hmm.
But for those media properties that do sort of lend themselves towards fandom, which tends to be the ones that more young people like, or the ones that are like speculative fiction, then they've learned the culture of the platform. I would say the way that they're speaking, it's kind of the lingua franca of like fandom. They've learned the done thing and they're executing it pretty much flawlessly. So it feels very authentic. In my research, I drew a lot from an earlier study from Leslie Willard, who had looked at um, MTV and Teen Wolf, but on Tumblr. This is a few years ago.
Hmm.
And so basically, Tumblr was where the fandom was living. MTV, who makes the show Teen Wolf, had noticed this and decided they wanted a piece of that. So they made a Tumblr presence. And at first, they were bad at it because they didn't understand the codes and conventions and the slang and how you're supposed to talk and how you're supposed to attribute fan art and give credit. They didn't know that, but they did learn. And she tracked them over a period of about 4 years. And by the end, they were good at it and they had figured out how you're supposed to speak and how you're supposed to act and what's the feeling rules and the feels culture of that particular, site of that community.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel
Hmm.
like they walked so that Netflix could run because they're doing it very well and very convincingly. The other thing is I do have a quote. Oh, it's from 2010, a marketing journal, which I used in my paper because it was just interesting, as early as that, what they were saying in this marketing journal was that, okay, people are more savvy now. So a savvy marketer doesn't do direct sales calls. We've got to be more subtle and more subliminal. Like they're really saying it. They're saying the quiet part loud.
Hmm.
So people knew, like, if you go onto your Instagram, there's a reason that you're going there. And the reason is not to be hit over the head with a bunch of sales messages like, buy this now.
Hmm.
What's more appealing is to see a funny meme or to see a clip from a show that you like or to see a
Yeah.
little dance or to see some fan art. So yeah, I think it is where it gets a bit murky because like we it's easy to forget they're a brand and they're doing brand things. They're trying to sell you something, but they don't really behave like it most of the time. I think they're playing a long game and they're relying on becoming that friendly presence or that entertaining presence on your feed and being unobtrusive, but just keeping in touch with you enough so that you don't want to cancel your subscription. Of course, it's a subscription model. So what they need is loyalty over time. Um, yeah, let me see if I wrote anything else on this. Oh, yeah, I do want to say one more thing.
Hmm.
Um, on that note, I drew from a study, an earlier study that had looked at musicians and their use of social media to sort of cultivate fans, which was very interesting and very useful for me. And it touches on this concept of relational labor. So that's intentionally creating and maintaining relationships which ultimately have monetary value. So this is something that the presumably young people who are interacting with these Netflix run accounts, I'm not sure if they would have an awareness of, but they might think this account is so cool, this account is so funny, I love following it, I like interacting with it, I love when they reply to my comments, that's so fun. But it is relational labor. They are doing it because their relationship with you has monetary value to them. That's what it's sort of based on, yeah, over time. If you feel that you have a relationship with them or with the characters, you feel like they're your friends or that you love the community, you're not going to want to lose access to that. So you're less likely to cancel your subscription. Yeah, and I think Netflix is very savvy in this way. When I made my video abstract, I made a joke about it being kind of like vertical integration. But I think it
Mm.
makes sense to think about it that way. If you're Netflix, if you own all the rights to this property, you've produced it, you've distributed it, you have exclusive rights to it. If you want to sell merch, it's all you. If you want to do Spotify playlists, that's all you. You own everything. And now they're trying to sort of get into that fandom space as well and be the first port of call for the fan community. And that makes sense. You own everything then. It's all yours. So why are they doing the human voice? At the end of the day, it's money, I think.
Mm. That does make a lot of sense, and I've never thought about it in that way, to be honest with you. You've opened my eyes to so many things, and now I'm not going to look at Netflix the same, to be honest with you. I'm always going to think that they just obviously want to keep me engaged in their content. That not that I actually, like you, have a lot of fandom in Netflix. However, I've been a sucker to some of the shows that are going on at the moment. We'll have to actually leave it there. That was a very fascinating talk. I really hope that you will look more into the fact that there might be putting things in the shows purposely for social media use, and maybe you could discover something and uncover something like some sort of Illuminati kind of situation. But any
I need someone on
future
the inside
yeah.
or I'll never know.
Any future studies or current works that you'd like to talk about just briefly, or is there anything that you've got coming up, or you're having a talk on?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, the best place to find me is my Instagram. It's called Social Cas, one word, Cas with a double S at the end, Social Cas. And that's where I'm talking about the work that I'm doing, some of my passion projects, which involve like making short documentaries, and then the work that I do in the arts industry, which involves a lot of travel, going to different festivals, recording, collaborating with artists and directors and things like that. And yeah, I just talk about how I make reels, how I solve problems, different things like that. And no, I don't have any talks coming up. Obviously, I'd love to talk. If anyone wants me to talk at them, hit me up. Send me a DM. I'll come talk about anything. It's my favorite thing to
Excellent.
do.
Well, it's been absolutely a pleasure to talk to you today. I've really enjoyed what you've talked about. And like I said, you've opened my eyes to a whole new world when it comes to Netflix. But anyway, thank you for listening to our podcast for today on the IERLab podcast. Once again, thank you to today's guest, Casta Sligh. And until next time, this has been Walter Lee. You may click on your next adventure now.